In an alternate world, King Albert of Elfrieden and Prime Minister Marx decide to summon a hero to face a dire threat. Kazuya Soma, a young man training to be a civil servant, finds himself summoned as their hero. Albert and Marx explain demons appeared 10 years ago and took over the northern kingdoms. The remaining kingdoms keep them invading, but maintaining armies is expensive, so Kazuya was summoned by the bankrupt Elfrieden kingdom to trade to the Grand Chaos Kingdom instead of gold. Kazuya convinces Albert to keep him as he was training to be a civil servant. For 3 days Kazuya learns everything he can about Elfrieden's economy. On the 4th day, Albert announces he is abdicating the throne to a shocked Kazuya, who will also marry his daughter Licia. Licia is convinced Kazuya stole the kingdom, but is surprised to find he has already found the money for Grand Chaos by trading Elfrieden jewelry to the neighboring Amadonia Principality. Licia realizes his other plans are also well thought out. Elsewhere, Duchess Excel of Walters sends her granddaughter Canaria to spy on Kazuya and decide if he is as capable as he appears. Marx puts Kazuya through an aptitude test to see if he can use magic. Kazuya discovers his magic can copy his consciousness into objects which then behave as if they are him, so he enchants pens to do his paperwork. He also puts assistants to work identifying overspending and fraud in the kingdom's budget. Kazuya then invites Licia to Elfrieden's farms, where he explains too much farmland is growing cotton, which is now worthless due to supply exceeding demand. While Licia is impressed with his insight, she seems concerned Kazuya still talks about one day abdicating and returning to Japan. Kazuya later meets Captain Ludwin of the Royal Guard and explains Albert's advisors are not of much use as they caused Elfrieden's problems in the first place, so he needs new advisors. Kazuya magically transmits a message to the entire kingdom that if anyone has an exceptionally useful skill, he will hire them regardless of age, social background, or level of education. This inspires the whole kingdom, and hundreds of people begin flocking to the city to audition their skills. Licia wonders if Kazuya would remain king if she agreed to marry him. As people begin auditioning their skills, Kazuya meets 5 deemed the greatest. Aisha Udgard, a dark elf with exceptional military abilities, swears fealty after receiving Kazuya's knowledge on saving the dying trees of the god-protected forest. Juna Doma, a human singer with Lorelei ancestry, sings a Japanese song from Kazuya's phone, lifting the entire kingdom's spirits. Pancho Panicotta, a nervous human glutton, is noted for having sampled every cuisine. Kazuya is excited to meet him as he plans to use his knowledge to save the kingdom and grants him the title Ishizuka. Seeing their king honor a man previously seen as useless, many others are inspired to audition. Hakuya Kwanmin, a human with unrivaled knowledge and memory, asks to be Kazuya's advisor after he deems Kazuya a good king based on how he treated Pancho. Lastly, Tomo Inui, a mystic wolf girl and homeless refugee, reveals she can talk to animals. As she is so nervous, Kazuya leaves his throne and kneels in front of her, where she whispers something important in his ear. Kazuya reveals to Marx, Licia, and Ludwin that Tomo's skill lets her speak to demons. A major barrier in the war is that no one can understand demon language, but with Tomo there exists the hope of negotiations leading to peace. Kazuya is concerned if news of Tomo's power leaks, it could lead to war with other kingdoms who may want her power for themselves. Marx suggests Kazuya adopt Tomo, but he cannot do that unless he is married. When Licia suggests letting her parents adopt Tomo as well as bringing Tomo's mother and brother to live at the palace, Tomo accepts. Licia later becomes annoyed when Kazuya claims the only place he can be left alone to relax is her bedroom. Pancho returns from a food-gathering mission, and Kazuya immediately broadcasts to the entire kingdom a rudimentary cookery program demonstrating unfamiliar foods from other nations they can survive on until he solves the food shortage, such as octopus, burdock root, and giant locusts. Kazuya also happily discovers salted beans and fermented mash water taste identical to miso and soy sauce. Pancho reveals the final food item, which causes quite a stir. The item is a creature called a gelin, which if prepared properly, creates a dish similar to kudzu noodles. Marx announces he is retiring as prime minister and suggests Hakuya as his replacement. Kazuya agrees and gives Marx a less stressful job. hoping to use his experience to navigate kingdom politics. Hakuya insists Kazuya take the afternoon off to relax and at the same time take Licia on a date with Aisha as their bodyguard. Aisha reminds Kazuya to visit her forest soon as some elves are refusing to cut down any trees even if it makes the forest healthier. Kazuya, Licia, and Aisha disguise themselves in military academy uniforms and decide to eat at the cafe where Juno works. While eating, it becomes apparent Aisha has a secret gluttonous side that almost rivals Pancho. Kazuya learns that polygamy is legal and socially acceptable and is surprised when Licia claims she would be willing to let Kazuya have up to 8 wives including herself, ensuring she got into herself at least 1 day a week. While considering the implications of this, Kazuya overhears a young lady arguing with a man at the next table. Kazuya narrates that because Elfrieden royalty are humans, the generals of the Army, Navy, and Air Force are from non-human species to ensure equality, but the generals are currently ignoring Kazuya. In Juno's cafe, the lady, a mystic fox named Keith Foxia, argues with her friend Halbert Magna, who is considering supporting the Carmine Duchy against Kazuya. Keith has correctly guessed Kazuya's intentions for trying to better the kingdom. Kazuya reveals himself and points out that, as a mage for Elfrieden's army, Keith would have to fight if Duke Carmine starts a civil war, meaning she might die and there is a slim chance Halbert might have to face her in battle. Realizing Kazuya is wiser than he thought, Halbert sides with Kazuya. Licia is impressed Kazuya noticed Halbert's feelings for Keith, but is concerned he still talks about abdicating and marrying for love instead of politics. Glaive, Halbert's father, asks Kazuya's forgiveness for his son. Kazuya instead has Keith promoted to staff officer in his royal guard and transfers Halbert to the same unit to be Keith's subordinate. In gratitude, Glaive asks for a private meeting to give Kazuya important information. Magic comprises 6 disciplines, the 4 elements plus light and darkness. Fire mages join the army, wind the Air Force, water the Navy, and earth the Forbidden Army. While light become medics, dark abilities are varied. Kazuya uses his magic to possess a doll called Little Musashibo. Little Musashibo joins adventurers mapping tunnels beneath the city. They encounter a salamander that forces them to flee, with Little Musashibo saving one adventurer, Yuno, who develops a crush on him. Thanks to Kazuya's secretaries, he secures the funds for Project Venetanova, the building of a new port on Elfrieden's coast, and hundreds of new roads. Kazuya visits Venetanova but learns construction was halted by a village elder named Europe, claiming the land belongs to Kaijin, god of the sea, and is guarded by a sea monster. After speaking to Europe, Kazuya determines the monster is actually a legend warning that the land is dangerous to build on and deduces that a tsunami strikes that land every few hundred years, so he relocates Venetanova and has earth mages construct giant flood defenses, impressing Licia that he is ensuring the kingdom's safety potentially thousands of years in the future. Kazuya considers how Elfrieden technology is different from Japan. As Elfrieden is short of laborers, Kazuya has 50 soldiers from his Forbidden Army, including Keith and Halbert, construct the road network. Kazuya inspects the road, revealing it improves transportation but also ensures wildlife is not negatively affected. Aisha receives word from her father, Chief Won, that a landslide in the god-protected forest buried half their village. Kazuya mobilizes the 50 soldiers, while also sending Licia to gather reinforcements. As the forest is 2 days away by foot, Kazuya has his men travel much faster on wagons pulled by earth dragons. Kazuya and the men begin disaster rescue and, with prototype wooden mice controlled by his magic, locates all the missing dark elves whether alive or dead. Licia arrives with the reinforcements to begin medical treatments, clean up the landslide, and begin rebuilding the village. Won's brother, Robthor, is devastated as his wife is dead and his daughter seriously injured. Aisha reveals Robthor was one of the main opponents of Kazuya's suggestion of thinning overpopulated trees, which could have prevented the landslide. Licia is surprised when Kazuya blames himself for not ensuring sufficient disaster preparedness for the whole kingdom. Kazuya is having trouble sleeping from stress, so Juno begins singing him to sleep. Air Force General Castor Vargas wants to rebel against Kazuya with the support of the Amadonia Principality, but Navy General Excel Walter is reluctant. Army General George Carmine despises Kazuya for removing men of authority in the name of efficiency. In Amadonia, King Gaius reveals he ultimately plans to betray both sides. Kazuya declares the food shortage is over and must move on to a plan he considers cruel but necessary for Elfrieden's security. Gaius ignores his minister Colbert's warnings that his plan violates the ban on interkingdom conflict. Colbert is fired, so Gaius' daughter, Roroa, involves Colbert in her plan instead. Kazuya meets the generals and warns either they submit to his rule or become traitors. Excel is satisfied to hear he will take no revenge and will keep Lagoon City as Elfrieden's naval base, so she submits. Castor refuses to accept Kazuya as king and becomes a traitor alongside George. Lycia cuts her hair, which to a lion man like George is a vow of absolute resolve. Kazuya thanks Juna for arranging peace with her grandmother Excel prior to the meeting. Amadonia begins their invasion, planning to occupy Elfrieden's southernmost city Altamira. Altamira's lord, Waisker Ro, surrenders to Gaius in exchange for time to convince his soldiers loyal to Kazuya to surrender. Albert and Kiev lead the Forbidden Army, Kazuya's royal guard, and the elves against Carmine's army and defeat them. Carmine is berated by the corrupt nobles he sheltered, but he in turn berates their lack of battlefield experience and hatches his own plan in secret. It is revealed Weist is loyal to Kazuya and is taking orders from Excel, who was in Altamira the entire time, to delay Gaius as long as possible. Castor sends his air force against the Forbidden Army and is surprised when Kazuya sends his largest battleship Albert straight to his fortress. Castor sends his daughter Carla to destroy the ship and capture Kazuya. Carla regrets she could not convince her father to side with Kazuya. She destroys its wheels but finds no crew or Kazuya, only a wooden hand. She realizes Kazuya was controlling Albert himself entirely by magic to draw out the remaining air force, allowing Kazuya and his army to attack Castor in his fortress without any defenses. Castor is defeated by Aisha, Lycia, and Little Musashibo. Castor accepts his defeat and he and Carla are fitted with slave collars. Castor's subordinate Tolman is given command of the Air Force and ordered to support the Forbidden Army. Carla is surprised Kazuya allows people he considers friends, like Halbert and Keed, to speak to him casually. Carmine declares to the corrupt nobles they have lost, and when they suggest using citizens as human shields, he has them arrested and both them and himself fitted with slave collars. Kazuya reveals Carmine was never a traitor. He was loyal to Kazuya the whole time but posed as a traitor to expose the hidden treason of the corrupt nobles, allowing Kazuya to remove them for good. This had been the important information Glaive gave during their private meeting. Excel reveals herself to Gaius, who realizes he has been tricked. Kazuya broadcasts to the kingdom his defeat of Carmine and Castor and intention to invade Amadonia. Gaius attempts to return to Amadonia, but loses half his army to Forbidden Army ambushes along the way, and by the time he makes it back to Van, Amadonia's royal capital, Kazuya has already captured it. Gaius orders his army to attack. Kazuya is troubled over declaring war so easily and concludes he must actually act like a king. Gaius orders his son Julius to retreat. He then enters the battle to kill Kazuya. Kazuya attempts to give a verbal last will and testament to Carla and naming Lycia queen if he dies, but Carla refuses and insists on killing Gaius for him. Carla is overwhelmed by Gaius until he is distracted by Kazuya's arrival, allowing Little Musashibo to grab Gaius and explode. Gaius survives long enough to contemptuously throw his sword at Kazuya's feet before being shot by Kazuya's archers. Roro receives word of her father's death and, despite her dislike of him, begins to cry. Knowing he cannot legally claim Amadonia due to the ban on interkingdom war and that Amadonia's citizens are bitter against Elfrieden, Kazuya instead sells their stockpiles of weaponry for rebuilding funds and orders food supply from Elfrieden to combat Amadonia's food shortages. He also broadcasts a musical program hosted by Aisha and Juna, including Margarita Wonder, Amadonia's most popular general, singing their national anthem to prove he has no ill will against Amadonia now or in the future. Maria Euphoria, the idealistic leader of the Grand Chaos Empire who created the ban on interkingdom war, sends her sister Jean to meet Kazuya. Kazuya is exhausted as ever since ending Gaia's oppressive military dictatorship, Amadonia's citizens are constantly celebrating. Pancho discovers a lily with edible roots similar to potatoes that could solve Amadonia's food shortages due to toxic pollen. The lilies can only be harvested by orangutans, so Kazuya arranges for Tomo to negotiate with them. He then takes her and Juna shopping. Sometime later, Jean appears and confronts Kazuya, revealing she has been watching him and is happy that while he is both wise and just, the rumors of his lechery by gathering a harem of famous women are false, as he has proven to be both humble and amusing. She also apologizes, as it was partially the Empire's fault Elfrieden summoned him from Japan to settle its debts, but Kazuya understands that for Elfrieden, it was political necessity and he bears no grudge. Unfortunately, Jean explains his invasion was still illegal and he will have to answer to Maria. Kazuya returns home with Tomo and Juna, and gives gifts to Aisha and Licia. During the evening, Albert and Alicia have a conversation about Albert's decision to abdicate the throne. The next day, Kazuya, Licia and Aisha are training in Van Castle when Kazuya is informed Hakuya and Ludwin want to see him about the redevelopment of Van and the status of the transportation network respectively. Afterwards, Kazuya has a meeting with Jean and Julius where Julius demands the return of Van. However, Kazuya counters by revealing evidence of how the Principality of Amadonia have violated the Mankind Declaration. Once Julius leaves the room, Kazuya and Jean agree to start negotiating in a different location. Once the negotiation is relocated into a different room, Jean reveals how the Grand Chaos Empire took punitive action against the Demon Lord's domain 10 years ago. She also reveals how they believe demons have 8 monsters. Upon hearing this, Kazuya shockingly admits that he cannot tell the difference between beastmen and demons, and he explains his mindset concerning the issue. The negotiation continues into the night where Kazuya states that he is willing to return Van to the Principality of Amadonia if they pay reparations. He then proposes a secret bilateral alliance with the Grand Chaos Empire. Afterwards, Kazuya declines Jean's offer to rule the Grand Chaos Empire with Maria. When they call it a day, Jean reveals the Demon Lord's name might be Divalroy, which leads an exhausted Kazuya to believe he has heard this somewhere before. He is then pampered by Licia. Julius is furious at having to pay reparations, but is forced to agree. As collateral, Kazuya demands Amadonia's only broadcast gemstone to prevent its use as a military resource, along with the books from Amadonia's royal library. Kazuya also demands a ransom for captured Amadonian nobles, excluding those guilty of war crimes and General Margarita Wonder, whom he keeps, fearing Julius will repeat the mistakes of his father. Kazuya tries to impress upon Julius that if he becomes a military dictator, he will lose his kingdom again when his own people rise against him. This is confirmed when the Amadonian people are visibly upset at Kazuya's departure, fearing Julius will take away the freedom Kazuya gave them. Jean returns to Maria who, hearing Kazuya's offer of a secret alliance with the Empire, cannot wait to meet him in person. She begins to believe Kazuya is a hero not meant to defeat the Demon Lord but to lead a complete revolution of society. Disguised as Little Musashibo, Kazuya attends a celebration of their victory with the adventurers and accidentally becomes drunk. Licia meets Yuno and teases Kazuya over how pretty she is. Kazuya visits George in the dungeon. There Kazuya explains what happened to the soldiers and corrupt nobility who joined the rebellion. When George reveals he knew from the outset that his plan would ultimately result in his execution, Kazuya angrily wonders why he is so willing to become a martyr. However, George refuses to answer. Kazuya then hands him a bottle of poison wine. Elsewhere, Hakuya and Jean have a conversation concerning the bilateral alliance, while Roroa complains to Colbert about how bored she is. At a ceremony, Kazuya awards Glaive the city of Randall, its surrounding territory, and a portion of George's authority. Aisha is up next, and she is assigned the rank of Kazuya's personal guardian. During Woen's turn, he asks Kazuya to marry Aisha, which Kazuya accepts once Licia gives her blessing. Finally, Juna attempts to make a request concerning Castor and Carla, but Excel stops her. As such, Juna instead asks Kazuya to marry her as well. However, he decides to wait until the kingdom has more singers, which Juna accepts. Meanwhile, a council plans to control the kingdom from behind the scenes. Lycia visits Carla in the dungeon and she reveals how she truly feels about the current situation. Carla then rejects Lycia's intercession. Sometime later, Castor and Carla's trial proceeds in front of Kazuya and a council of noblemen. During the trial, two noblemen, Pilteri Saracen and Owen Jabana, speak out for the defendants, while the rest of the council wants them to be executed. As such, the latter noblemen are killed by Kazuya's personal intelligence unit, the Black Cats. Castor soon receives his sentence. He is remanded over to Excel, is forbidden entry into the former Duchy of Vargas, and is not allowed to have contact with his son and wife. Once he is escorted out of the room, Carla is sentenced to become Kazuya and Lycia's slave. Kazuya then asks her to kill him if he ever becomes a tyrant. Following the trial, an exhausted Kazuya heads to his room. Lycia and Aisha later decide to cheer him up. Meanwhile, Roroa has a meeting with Colbert and Sebastian. Ludwin reports a childhood friend, Genya Maxwell, has done something terrible and takes Kazuya and Lycia to an abandoned dungeon to meet her. As the dungeon no longer spawns monsters, the Maxwell family turned it into one giant research laboratory. Genya reveals she is a self-proclaimed over-scientist, researching a power other than magic, such as the broadcast gemstones, which are actually the dead hearts of dungeons. Without them, dungeons cannot spawn monsters and become abandoned like her laboratory. It is her dream to examine a gemstone while it is alive and functioning. She also reveals she has discovered a method of storing magic in the formerly useless and dangerous mineral curse ore, which the Elfrieden Kingdom has vast amounts of. Kazuya realizes she has essentially created a rechargeable magical battery that could not only lead to an industrial revolution, but also a war with their jealous neighboring kingdoms. To keep Genya tied to Elfrieden, Kazuya and Lycia ask if Genya would mind marrying Ludwin, which after some embarrassment, they both agree to. Now engaged, Ludwin remembers he sought Kazuya and Lycia because Genya has caused a scandal by stealing dragon bones. Genya took the bones from an excavation site to construct Makadra, a mechanical dragon, fearing it could cause an international incident with the Star Dragon mountain range. Kazuya decides to contact them with an apology. He also gives Genya a new lab so he can keep an eye on her. Meanwhile, Julius faces resentment from his people after trying to turn Amadonia back into a dictatorship. Back at the palace, Carla becomes a chambermaid. When the people of Amadonia publicly declare loyalty to Elfrieden, Julius is forced to flee to the Empire. Based on how sudden and successful the rebellion was, Kazuya and Hakuya suspect it was organized by one person. Without a leader, Amadonia is invaded by two neighboring kingdoms, the Lunarian Orthodox Papal State and the Republic of Turgeis. Thus, Amadonia's nobles officially request Amadonia become part of the Elfrieden Kingdom. Despite the considerable disadvantages, Kazuya agrees and puts Colbert, Amadonia's former finance minister, in charge of rebuilding Amadonia. Roroa, Julius' younger sister, smuggles herself into Kazuya's court in a carpet, but Kazuya discovers her due to knowing the legend of how Cleopatra met Caesar. Impressed, Roroa announces her intention to marry Kazuya. Roroa demonstrates her knowledge of Kazuya's political and personal life and admits she organized the rebellion that overthrew Julius. She also points out the dangers posed by the Lunarian Orthodox Papal State. Impressed, and with the agreement of all his fiancées, Kazuya agrees to marry Roroa and let her run her merchants' network. Amadonia is then absorbed by Elfrieden and renamed the Kingdom of Fredonia. Via a magic mirror, Kazuya meets Maria. Despite her personal feelings on the matter, she is forced to object to his ruling of Amadonia due to it violating the Mankind Declaration. However, when Kazuya points out the paradox that is associated with the declaration, Maria decides Kazuya can keep Amadonia. They also agree on the danger of the Church, whose religious believers reside in all kingdoms and can cause untold chaos without ever breaking the declaration, especially if they take advantage of the war with the demons. The next morning, Lycia and Aisha are furious when they see Roroa in Kazuya's bed, leading to an awkward conversation about Kazuya delaying having children with Lycia. Kazuya needs more employees. Unfortunately, literacy rates are not high among the people. It is then explained that slavery is legal. Meanwhile, Ginger Camus' grandfather dies and leaves Ginger his slave trade. After speaking with his slaves, especially Raccoon Girl San, he promises to only sell them to kind owners. San is confused when Ginger starts teaching the slaves how to read and count. Kazuya suddenly declares nobles will be promoted or demoted based on how well they manage their lands, leading to demand for employees who can read and count. Ginger quickly sells all his slaves on the agreement they be freed and hired as employees. Ginger is later visited by Kazuya, who offers to buy San. However, having become smitten with San, Ginger refuses to sell her. Having seen that Ginger's kind reputation is true, Kazuya reveals himself and explains he plans to reform the slavery system in a manner that would avoid a civil war. The result being slaves would all become paid employees and receive education at a training center. As such, Ginger happily accepts Kazuya's offer to become director of the center, which he would own as a private business with San. Kazuya decides to tour the city with Licia, Carla, and Owen and shows where he had the slums rebuilt. Due to the existence of healing magic, medicines are primitive and hygiene is not well understood. Kazuya hopes to educate the citizens about germs and has contacted a three-eyed species whose third eye can actually see germs. Their advanced medicinal practices even include antibiotics, which Kazuya names 3-iodine, since it is extracted from a subspecies of gelin called a gelmetic. Tomo has provided assistance. The group runs into three-eyed Dr. Hilda Norg, who has been helping Kazuya at Ginger's training center by providing lessons on hygiene. Kazuya has also introduced free school lunches for children and hopes to expand the center to include advanced subjects. When Ginger expresses concern about illiterate adults being reluctant to attend, Kazuya promises to convince them. While visiting the refugee camp outside city walls, illegal slavers attempt to kidnap children, thinking the kingdom will not care. Kazuya is then forced to fight for the first time, before he can be exposed as the king. Kazuya gives credit for the arrest to Yuno and her party. Kazuya then decides to meet the refugee chief. Chief Jurikoma, his sister Komain, and most refugees wish to return to their homes, but since this might never be possible, Kazuya is forced to give them two options: become citizens of Fredonia or leave. Jurikoma requests land for his people to work as farmers, but Kazuya declines. Instead, he offers to move them into Venetonova and help finish its construction. Brad, Hilda's assistant, arrives with news of a mother who is struggling to give birth and he needs assistance cutting her open to save them. Realizing the baby will be born without a country to call home, Jurikoma accepts Kazuya's offer of Venetonova. He then makes Komain the new chief, deciding that any refugees who refuse citizenship will join the army with him and fight to get their country back. Once the birth is successful, Carla calls out Kazuya for acting nonchalant about the situation given the country's lack of surgical skill compared to Japan, which he apologizes. At the mother's request, Kazuya becomes the boy's godfather and names him Fuku. Given the happy atmosphere, Licia asks Kazuya if he wants to have his own child that very night, but he still insists on waiting. Excel gives Kazuya's fiancés bridal lessons on the skills required to maintain their individual relationships with Kazuya and cooperate as joint queens. She also reveals she hypnotized Kazuya and used the information to create a manual that reveals the individual reasons he loves the girls. Concerning Licia, he did not give an answer, as even under hypnosis he was determined to only confess his feelings to her in person. During the lecture, Excel rewards the girls with personalized books of what Kazuya wants to do to them sexually. Elsewhere, Maria decides to adopt Kazuya's new approach to slavery. In Venetonova, the refugees, who traditionally are hunter-gatherers, struggle adapting to typical employment. Back at the palace, after Pancho successfully recreates yakisoba sauce from Kazuya's specifications, Kazuya decides to use it as the basis for turning Venetonova into a seafood cuisine hotspot, creating jobs for the refugees and attracting customers from every nation. That night, Licia is tempted to use her book to successfully seduce Kazuya, but passes on the opportunity. Carla then informs them that Albert has requested a private meeting with Kazuya, which Kazuya had been expecting for some time. During the meeting with Albert and Alicia, Kazuya asks why they trusted him so quickly after summoning him. Albert describes an alternate timeline where he appointed Kazuya prime minister. Because of this, the nobles who would become Kazuya's enemies succeeded in having him banished. Then once the war with Amadonia broke out, Kazuya, Lycia and George would be killed and Elfrieden destroyed. Alicia revealed to Albert she had the ability to send memories to her past self. As such, she sent Albert's memories of failure to his younger self, convincing him to make Kazuya king and ensure Elfrieden's survival. Having explained everything, Albert apologizes for the mistakes of his alternate self and announces he and Alicia will retire into anonymity. Lycia is curious about the meeting but accepts Kazuya cannot tell her what was discussed. As they watch the New Year's fireworks, Kazuya confesses his love to Lycia and officially asks her to marry him as they share a kiss, introducing the concept of New Year's resolutions. Kazuya gives resolutions to Hakuya, Pancho, Roroa, Juna, Tomo, Aisha and Lycia to support him as he takes the kingdom into the future. So this is the end of anime. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it.